A warm welcome back to today's aviation news recap. A possible A220 variant coming soon, 787 deliveries to China, and new aircraft being required. Right at the beginning of the most recent edition of the Paris Air Show, Airbus took the time to publish its latest global air market forecast. The report highlights the future requirements for planes and the need for many more to be introduced over the next few decades, up to in fact 2044. The plane maker says that it expects the global aircraft fleet to jump to 49,210 aircraft by 2044. Therefore, we are just a matter of years away from this reaching the 50,000 mark. As a result, there will be a requirement for around 25,000 planes across the next 20 years alone. However, this will not just be for Airbus planes, despite the forecast coming from this manufacturer. These types of global fleet forecasting also include the competing manufacturers who will make up future deliveries to airlines around the world with their own commercial airplane divisions. Further forecasting also indicated that India will experience considerable growth over the next 20 years, and the demand for new planes in this market will far exceed that of all others. The information we've received such as this doesn't come as a shock. This has already been outlined, but as with each year, we receive these updated and revised forecasts. What all of this means is there's a race underway for airlines to develop, and plane makers to win the all-important contracts to provide the jets to airlines in this country as soon as possible. To provide the required aircraft to airlines around the world across the next 2 decades, not just Airbus, but the entire manufacturing industry needs to find a way to stabilize their operations. Unsurprisingly, smaller aircraft will lead the way in terms of deliveries, with families such as the A320 and 737, especially the eventual replacement of these jets being launched too, all being required. These single-aisle planes are workhorses for airlines, and their flexibility allows access to all types of airlines, regardless of size, with most being able to find a use for them. By the mid to late 2030s, we know Airbus is hoping to have seen its A320 replacement enter service, which will significantly enhance efficiency across the single-aisle operation, and depending on how they're able to get this plane off the ground, you're looking at a pretty hefty production rate from the beginning. Regarding a competitor, which would come from Boeing and help replace their own 737 MAX, we know this is a plane maker still in a position where a couple of variants in the family have yet to receive certification, thereby putting the American manufacturer behind its competitor, and quite significantly. Over to the next story, and Boeing continues to ramp up delivery output to China with the handing over of a 787 Dreamliner in mid-June. The American plane maker delivered the 787-9 model to Junyao Airlines, a Chinese carrier, which you may recall had previously entered headlines for refusing the delivery of this aircraft in April. Despite the headlines surrounding Boeing and its 787 product obviously following that tragic Air India crash, the delivery marks a landmark moment for the manufacturer, as trade tensions ease for the moment at least. The delivery recommencement follows initial suspensions of deliveries that were first initiated when China confirmed it would not take on new commercial airplanes. This was a measure purely done as a retaliatory act. And while there were certainly some that had the feeling this could extend on for quite the medium to long term, only several weeks after deliveries were suspended, the pair announced that deliveries would formally resume this month as part of a halt previously that affected everyone to a certain extent. If the delivery suspension had continued for that prolonged period that some were expecting, well, there would be very apparent concerns about the impact this would have on airlines located in China, let alone the repercussions that then would be felt on Boeing, who have planes ready to be delivered to Chinese operators, but now these may potentially have to find new homes. There wasn't, however, a lack of airlines that were seeing this as an opportunity for them to get aircraft in sooner rather than later, from the likes of Air India themselves to Malaysia Airlines. These were just two airlines that came out publicly really discussing their intent to potentially seize the delivery of these planes if they were unable to head to the Chinese operators for a long period of time. Junyao Airlines' acceptance of the 787 again also followed that delayed acquisition in mid-April. Reporting by Bloomberg at the time suggested the operator was responding to the escalating trade war and pushing back against any possible acquisition of new planes from Boeing, the airline citing that it would come with additional costs incurred for these planes, and that would be a very negative factor for them, preventing the acquisition of jets, and it necessitated a re-evaluation to determine if it was even worth bringing the jet in for the costs that they would face. The airline relies heavily on the 787 Dreamliner, and at the same time, there are now 10 units present. They're all for the 787-9. This was previously 9 at the time of rejection, but it highlights how important this fleet type is. It is also their only wide-body aircraft, so it's crucial for not just long-haul, but also serving in-demand locations with a plane that requires a higher capacity. If Juneyao Airlines had continued to reject planes, this would have hindered its ability to meet demand and sustain its obvious international operations, let alone prevent them from growing as intended. I'll say it again, but the US and China trade war is always something that fluctuates. It's never quite all okay, and we know time and time again, whether it's been month by month or year by year, the situation continues to evolve. So don't be surprised if you see something take place in the next few months or next few years again, but for the moment, all parties will be happy that deliveries can take place. On to the final story, and Airbus is progressing with the development of its A220 program through a new high-capacity version. The certification process is expected to commence this year, providing there are no further hiccups between now and then, and it involves a 160-seat version of the A220. Since taking over the program, Airbus has sought to continue developing it, recognizing that it has a pretty big advantage over competitor plane makers, and this is particularly driven by the absence of its rival in Boeing. The largest variant of the regional series at the moment is the -300 model, which can seat a maximum of 149 passengers, a figure that will obviously vary depending on how an airline chooses to configure the plane. However, with this new endeavour and certification work expected to commence, Airbus would look to add 11 more passengers to the maximum of this, but obvious modifications would be required. The modifications stem from the requirement for an additional over-wing exit, ensuring the plane remains safe to operate in the unlikely event of an emergency. Obviously, with whatever Airbus looks to proceed with, it needs to be compliant in more ways than one. While adding capacity to the series is now seemingly a reality, other adjustments are also expected as part of Airbus's ongoing attempts to develop the program. During a briefing in Toulouse, and as reported by Flight Global, the chief engineer stated that the A220 has some really strong demand, and there has also been quite a fair bit of interest in a higher capacity model. This definitely not something that we're hearing for the very first time. It's been long documented interest for several years now. I am looking towards that of Latvian carrier Air Baltic, who have said upfront they would not hesitate to switch to a high-capacity A220 model if it were to go on to be launched. Some dub it the A220-500. This was even reported in 2023 by Bloomberg, who cited the Bank of America. Airbus firmly downplayed this at the time, confirming the rumours around a prospective model of this type was untrue. Now their intention is clear that they believe there is further capacity that can be added to the A220 program to give them the upper edge on the plane maker they're really competing with in this space, which is Embraer and their very popular and emerging E2 program. Keen to hear your take on any of the stories down below in the comments. Thanks for watching. Take care, do be safe, and I'll see you tomorrow for your next industry recap.